Hello, everybody. You're about to meet Dr. Myrtle Bell, a renowned researcher and professor. She authored Diversity in Organizations, now in its fifth edition. Her book is both comprehensive and research-based. If you want one resource for teaching and learning about diversity, this is the book to get. Dr. Bell has won numerous awards and has been recognized as a distinguished thought leader by the Society for Human Resource Management. Here's Myrtle. Hello, everybody. I am totally delighted to bring to you Professor Myrtle Bell, who has an enormous list of accomplishments and who has written a most amazing book, Diversity in Organizations. Welcome, Myrtle.
Thank you, Jean. I'm happy to be here.
And I might also add that Myrtle wrote the foreword, one of the two forewords to our book, Conscious Change, that's coming out in July. So publicly, I want to thank you, Myrtle, for that beautiful, heartfelt foreword that you wrote for us.
I'm happy to have been able to do that, and I count it as an honor to be able to do that.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I mentioned that Myrtle wrote Diversity in Organizations. I want to just give you a snippet of what she's done. Let's see. Her book is research-based. It's about teaching and learning for diversity in organizations. And I want to show y'all, I want to show you the table of contents, which flat blew me away when I looked at it. So I'm going to share screen. Just look at this. So this is the brief table of contents. She has a 4-page table of expanded table of contents that comes later. But she covers the theory and legislation. She looks at specific groups. Look at this list of groups: Blacks, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Asian Americans, white Anglo Americans, Native Americans, sex and gender, work and family, sexual orientation and gender identity, religion, age, physical and mental ability, weight and appearance. I mean, she covers the gamut of ways that people can bond together in terms of how they identify themselves and experience discrimination. And then she goes into global diversity. Writing that book had to be more than a notion. How long did it take you?
It took me about 8 months from start to finish, the writing of it, about 8 months.
About 8 months. Okay, now this is the 4th edition.
Yes, I've just finished the 5th edition. It'll be out. It's out now. It just came out a couple weeks ago.
Oh, my word. Okay, so you built on what was done before.
Yes.
And so the 8 months was building on number 3, or?
Well, the 8 months for the first edition, and then 8 more months for the second edition, and 8 more months for the third edition, fourth and fifth. So you have to go in and decide what needs to be updated, what needs to be deleted, what has changed since you wrote that, what's new, what are they talking about now? So in the fifth edition, new stuff they're talking about is things like the Crown Act. That's new. They're talking about caste discrimination and legislation regarding caste discrimination against Indians in the United States. So there's a lot that's still going on. So you have to, update it, and new research, new studies. So it takes about 8 months of, not all day, every day, but every day.
Why do you think this book has been so successful that you're now into the 5th edition?
I tell you, Jean, it's mind-boggling to me, but I feel like first and foremost, it's a gift from God that, the timing was such that society realized we need to be investigating this stuff. We need to be talking about it, and we need something research-based. You mentioned that it's research-based, and that was my goal, to give research and data, because we can hear a lot of garbage if we go to the wrong sources. And so I tried to use academic research. I tried to use Pew Research. I tried to use legitimate type sources so I could feel comfortable writing it down in this 500-page book.
Okay, so immodesty, without any modesty, why do you think this book has struck such a chord?
Well, Jean, I really believe that people don't know what they don't know. And once they look at some data and they, because the book has history. And so for every group, I talk about some of the history that really has mattered. And people know about the history of slavery, but they don't know about the history of women not being able to have the right to vote till 1920. They don't know about Native Americans and certain things that happened to them, about Latinos also being lynched. And so when we build on this foundation, and then that gets to where we are, that strikes a nerve with people. So every semester, I have students say to me, I didn't believe you. And I looked it up, and it's worse than you said. Or I went to the references that you had down below, and I looked at the actual study, and you should have also said this, and you should have said that. And it's just really fulfilling for people to realize I am learning, and there's a lot that I have to learn. And I also have in there myths and misperceptions. And a lot of things that we believe we know are just wrong, just flat out wrong. So, like, many people believe that African American women do not work. African American women are welfare queens. And they're surprised to learn that African American women work outside the home more than any other group of women. They believe that women who have small children don't work. They're stay-at-home moms. In actuality, women with small children work outside the home because they need to buy diapers and formulas and pay the mortgage and stuff like that. So they're really surprised about stuff. And I think the surprises are what, bring them in. And then they go and look at some more of the data, and they're just blown away by the data. They think affirmative action means quotas. Quotas are largely illegal. And so I do believe that the roping them in and showing them the history and how we got to here, and then data, is what has struck a chord with so many readers.
Well, I really loved your misperception and the correct facts. I can't remember the exact words you used, but you put that throughout
Yes,
the book. You'd say,
yes.
here's a myth and here's the truth.
Here's the truth. Right, right.
Why are you how did you get into this? Tell us about your background, your growing up. Did you grow up in a mostly integrated or segregated community? Just tell us how you
Oh,
got from
okay. From that to
childhood to here.
Okay, so I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on the Deep South, and I grew up in a very segregated neighborhood. So I lived in a neighborhood called Southern Heights, and it is associated with Southern University, which is an HBCU in Baton Rouge. And so many of the kids who lived there, parents worked at Southern. My mom worked at Southern. Many of the kids went to Southern. We called it Southern High. That was the neighborhood,
Yes,
but that
sure.
was first through sixth grades. I went to Southern High, and I don't know how much research you know about all Black schools for Black children. They're nurturing environments,
That's how I grew up.
wonderful environments. It's a wonderful environment. You don't get the you're not good enough, socialization that brings you down. And so I grew up there and I loved it and it was wonderful. But in seventh grade, I moved from Southern High to University High, which is an all white school at LSU. And so I went from being one of all the Black kids to one of two Black kids in a class of 60, one of two Black kids. And so I was in seventh grade, and I was also a year younger than everybody else in the class. So I was 11 years old. And so that was, I don't want to say a rude awakening, because my mom exposed us to a lot of different people. And so even though I lived in a segregated neighborhood, she had white friends. I had been to powwows as a child because she took us and exposed us to a bunch of stuff like that. But it still was very different going from an all black school to an all white school for an 11-year-old child. And one of the things that sticks out in my mind is my seventh grade teacher was engaged to be married. And so she came to school, history teacher no less, and she read her um, invitation and she said, everybody was invited to the wedding. And she pulled me aside after class and she said, now you can come to the wedding because it's at a church, but you can't come to the reception because it's at the country club. And they don't let niggers, Nigras, that's the word she used. They don't let niggers in the country club, but you can come to the church. And so, of course, I went home and told my mom, and my mom marched up to the school and told the principal, what had happened. And he was just totally irate. And he called her in. Of course, she starts crying and she didn't mean anything by it. And it's true, they don't let niggers in the country club. And she was just trying to spare me embarrassment and humiliation. And so that was one of many things that happened. I also watched
What
and
happened?
observed.
Did you go
Well,
to the wedding?
oh no, I didn't
That's what I
want
thought.
to go, and my mom told her, in fact, then, she said, we're selective people. We don't even want to go. You just shouldn't be doing this. Her
Sure.
point and the principal's point was you shouldn't be doing this. You're out of line here. And so he set a rule then that, is common now that if anybody gets invited to anything, everybody gets invited to anything, everything. And if one person can't come because of something, nobody can come because of something. But that was one thing that happened. And I also remember that in the cafeteria, most of the people serving the food were Black women, but the dietitian, the boss, was a white woman, and everybody called her by her name, which I know now. But the other people were their first names, their
Yes.
first names. The janitor and she was a janitor also, who cleaned the girls' bathroom and who cleaned the guys' bathroom. They were Black and white, a Black man and a Black woman. And the students called them by their name. And these are old people, like 50 and 60 years old. And why are these children calling them Mandy and Solomon? Like, what is this? And so I asked them their name. And, in the South, you don't call any grown person their name. You ask them, Mrs. So-and-so, and that's what you call them. And so I did that. And I modeled that. And so I learned then, you can model, you can learn and model things.
Well, hang on. Did others imitate you when you started doing that, or were you
Some
the
of
only
them
one?
did. Some of them did. Some of the progressive ones did. And they realized, why are we calling these people by their name? And they
Oh, how
realized,
lovely.
not many, but some did, yes.
Wait,
Also,
I think that's so important. And I'm so glad you're signaling this out because a lot of people, when they try to institute change, they aim for everyone and they don't know the power of changing just a few minds.
just a few, just a few. That's
Yeah.
right. And that's what I think about in teaching, they all won't get it. But if some get this and some get that, and they go out and spread it,
Yes.
the message gets wider and wider and wider. And that's all we can hope for. You might not change the world, but you can change parts of it. You can.
Right.
So that was part of my childhood. Another thing that I remember distinctly being a little kid, my mom and her sister decided they were going to integrate a laundromat that was near our house. And yes. And so my mom had 2 kids and her sister had 2 kids, and they took us to the laundromat and they started washing the clothes. And so the owner came out, he's red faced and he's yelling and he says, can't you read? The sign says whites only. And so they turned and they looked at the sign and they said, yes, we can read. And they held up their laundry, which was white underwear and towels, nothing but whites, nothing but whites. Yes, yes. And I
Oh, you
remember
had a
that.
smart mama.
Yes, and they figured out what to do and they did it. And I remember being afraid, because I was a little kid, but I knew we could get in trouble. We could go to jail. And he went back in his office and he slammed the door, but he didn't call the cops. And they kept doing their laundry and finished and left. And from then on, the place was integrated.
You're
That's,
kidding.
I'm
After
not
that,
kidding. After that, Black people kept going in there. After that, they kept going in there. Yes, and the sign eventually went down.
what
Yes,
year was this?
I think it was about 65.
Okay, this is after the March on Washington. This is
Yes, but it took a long
yeah.
time for
Yes,
people to
yes,
start
but
coming.
I'm yeah.
Yes,
So it by that time, what he was doing was illegal.
it was illegal. It was illegal, but there was a lot of
Sure.
illegal stuff still going on today. So
Yes.
yeah, yeah, 60 years later. Yeah.
So
So
okay, with that kind of modeling, what did you learn from that?
I had such a good model. I learned that sometimes, even if you're scared, you have to step up for change and change will come. I learned that baby steps. So, that was a baby step, but it was a big step. And it mattered we had a washer in our home. It mattered to folks who didn't have a washer. And so sometimes you're not just working for yourself, you're working for everybody. You're working for society, working for change really is important. It really is important.
So she took this on, even though you had a washer at home.
You had a washer at home. You had a washer at home. I remember so many stories about my mom. There was another time, um, she was a professor at Southern, and her sister worked at the school for the blind next door. And so they were well educated, very beautiful Black women. And somehow, some bank was trying to reach out to Black customers. And so they asked my mom to be in an ad to reach Black customers. And the ad was for loans. It was for loans. And she was going to get paid. And she refused. She said, we don't always have to borrow money from you. Can you give us an ad? Let me be working in the bank or something like that. Don't make it be demeaning, as she saw it. And so she said no. And so I watched and observed. You have to pay attention. I also remember we went to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home in Virginia. And so I learned as a little child, there are disjoints between what he said and what he did. And I remember being along the way, we drove and we'd stop at different restaurants and we would go in to the kitchen door and tip the people doing the cooking. There were always Black people doing the cooking, and it was always a white person doing the serving. And so she taught me that, they're doing the hardest work, but she's making the money and she's dressed clean and nice and everything. And so I learned and observed as a child. And so that's why I do this work, because I pretty much had no choice. It was ingrained in me.
Well, this is the fact that she would tip the cooks. She was a model of equity.
Yes, she was. Yes, she was. Yes, she was. And I observed that and paid careful attention. And I remember, they would have pockets and you'd put the money in the pockets and say, thank you. And that would just mean so much to them. I remember doing that many times, many times. Lots of things that stick out in my mind. I told you that I went to powwows as a child. And one of her closest friends was a white woman, and she was engaged with powwows in Louisiana. There are lots of Native American people in Louisiana, which many people don't know. And so I remember going to my first powwow and realizing this is not like you see on TV, right? This is a real ceremony with real Native American people, and they're not about to scalp somebody. Learned so many things from that. I learned she also was a professor when I was growing up, and our home was our home away from home, the home away from home from international students. And so we had people from Ghana, we had people from Nigeria, people from Malaysia, from China who would spend Christmas sometimes with us because they couldn't go home. Some of them would spend the whole summer with us because they couldn't go home. And so I learned, like, we're all the same. we're all the same. We just look different. We have different accents, but we're human beings with hopes and dreams. You know, I learned that from my mom, who modeled love for people who are different and concern about right and wrong, standing up for right and standing up against wrong. When she was getting her doctorate, she was at LSU, and one of her teachers gave her a B. And she said, because she didn't like Black people. And my mom had clearly earned an A. She was the best student in the class. She was working at the time at Southern and went back to get her doctorate. And this woman just told her, she gave her a B because she didn't like Black people. And my
He up and
mom,
told her that?
yeah, she told her that. She told her that. Just straight up told her that. And so my mom went to the dean of the school, and they made her change the grade, but she kept teaching. And that was a problem. She kept teaching. She was a tenured professor at LSU at the time. And my mom was really bothered by that because, there were young Black girls in class. My mom was a nearly 50-year-old woman at that time, so she could stand up for herself, and but they let that woman keep teaching. But there's so many stories I could tell you, things I watched and learned and saw and figured
But
out.
I can see now why you had the patience to write this book and why you covered all of those different groups, because this is what you knew. You
This is
knew
what I,
not to leave anybody out.
yeah, I tried not to leave anybody out. And you know, looking back, certain things, we had family friends who I'm sure, in fact, I learned later, were lesbians. And they lived together, but they had different rooms. So you go to their house for dinner, and this is this one's room, and this is this one's room, and you think they're roommates. But in hindsight, you realize in society at that time, that's what they did. But going back, I look and think, my mom was friends with people. She was friends with people, and she loved people, and she didn't say, oh, they're gay, I'm not going to be friends with them. I'm going to have dinner with them, and I'm going to take my kids, and they're going to get to know and love them just like they do other people in the neighborhood.
Okay, so I'm looking at these chapters here. Which ones were the most, which one, just, you don't have to say the most, among those that were the most challenging? Talk about one of them. What made it challenging?
Well, I would say, as a Black person, it was most challenging to write the chapter on African Americans. I know the literature, I read it, but so what I did was every group that I was talking about, I had hundreds of articles, like a stack, a foot and a half high of paper, because I would print them out because I'm of that generation. And just going through and knowing that this is happening to people all around the country because of the color of their skin, because they were enslaved in this country, that was painful to write. That was really painful to write. And that was the most painful to write. And I would say probably the second most painful one was the one on sexual orientation. That was also hard to write because, you read the literature about suicide and about parents, putting their kids out on the street. And, it just was hard. That was a hard one to write. That was a really hard one to write.
When I was teaching, the students would tell their stories. I taught empowerment and leadership and community, and organizational change. So students would tell their stories, and the stories of being kicked out the house. One year, one guy spent the whole semester. This is the empowerment class. The whole semester trying to decide, was he going to take his partner with him when he went home for Christmas in rural Texas.
Oh, did he do it?
No, at the end of the semester, he didn't. He kept thinking, am I being chicken? Well, how will my parent my mother says it's okay, but my father doesn't, but I want to be with my family and I don't want us to get killed.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So but am I being chicken? So he went round and round with that. And at the end, when he said, I'm not going home, the whole class burst into applause because it was
Right.
his decision, but nobody wanted him to not show up the next semester.
Right. And sometimes, empowerment is this being able to decide not to do something. Like that
Exactly.
doesn't mean you're a chicken. It means you're strong enough to say, I'm not doing this. I can't do this for my sanity, for my safety, whatever. Let them come see me.
You have a section called What Makes Diversity Training Most Effective?
Mm.
Now, as you so eloquently described in the book, there's all kinds of controversy about whether diversity training whether diversity by itself is effective. What good does it do? And then on top of that, what is diversity training effective? So could you address both questions? Let's start off with the advantages of diversity. And you can be brief because most of the people hearing this already know it. Just cover that. And then
Mm.
let's talk about diversity training.
Okay, so, when we think about advantages of diversity, I want to first say the most important thing in my view is that it's right. It's right to allow people to work and thrive and grow and contribute and not keep them down because of their race, which is socially constructed, because of their sex or gender, because of their age. It's just morally wrong. So let's put that on the table first. But as far
But
as
wait, I just
advantage,
want to say something. You
yes,
hammered that point chapter after chapter. The numbers support it and this and that, but morally it's right.
yes. And there are people who disagree with me. And that's fine. I'm not going to try to convince you. I can't convince you. That's between you and your God or whomever you follow. That's not for me. But the other stuff in terms of advantages, diversity, there's research on it. Done right, diversity makes organizations function better. Diverse groups come up with better solutions to problems, more solutions to problems. Diversity makes us smarter because if we're in a group with people who are not all like us, and so a diverse group, and I want to say this too, people think diversity is Black people. You could have a homogenous Black group of people. That's not diversity. That's a homogenous group, like a homogenous white group of people. Like diversity is Black people, white people, Latinos, Native Americans, old people, young people, people with disabilities. It's all of us together. And that makes us smarter. And so when we're in a group with people who are different from us, thinking that they will be harder to convince, we come up with better arguments. We come up with better PowerPoints. We do a better job with our work because we know we might have to convince them differently. So much research on it. Diverse marketing teams keep you from making embarrassing commercials, keep you from making embarrassing products. Sometimes I see things and I'll say, so who was on this marketing team? How did this get out? How did this get out? And so diversity really can affect your bottom line if you do it right. Lack of diversity can affect your bottom line if you do it poorly. And the other thing, if we think about changing demographics of the United States, we're more and more Black, we're more and more Latino, we're more and more gay, LGBTQ, we're more and more all kinds of stuff. We have 6 generations, and we need to figure out ways to make everybody feel like, I want to work there. I want to work there. I want to shop there. I want to support this organization. Because if we don't, we'll be in trouble.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. So now, what I have said in training is diversity makes you smarter.
Mhm.
If you have to talk and get along with people different from yourself, with different attitudes from yourself, you're expanding your brain cells.
You absolutely
You-
are.
You'd have to generate new brain cells to cope with the new information.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
diversity training.
Mhm.
What makes what works and what doesn't work?
Okay, so there's a lot of research on that too, but I'll just say briefly, what doesn't work is mandatory training for people who really don't want to go, who really don't want to learn. They just shut down. They might be there, they might be on their phone. If you ban phones, they can still shut you out. So a lot of organizations, and there's merit to saying everybody has to go. But if there are people who are resistant enough to have to be forced to go, they're likely not to get very much out of it. But they might get some. They might get some. So I'm not saying don't institute mandatory training because there's research that says that if the leader goes and the leader um, embraces it, that can help make resistant folk go and try to learn or go at least go and listen a bit. And I do believe that people can learn even if they're resistant to learning. They might not learn 100% of what you give them, but if they learn 3% of it, that's 3% they didn't know. And so for diversity training, I believe that you need to have willing people, people who are open to learning. I think that helps a whole lot. I think it helps to have the leaders go, and there's research on that too, have the leaders go first, and then the leaders can model. I've gone, I've learned, this is what I learned. I'm implementing these things in the organization. And that helps the organizational members see this is really serious and I can't just joke around and not take this seriously at work.
Okay. The training that I did, my first diversity training in a corporate setting was mandatory. And
Mhm.
the VP sat and challenged the CEO and said, "This is just leadership. Why do we have to do this?" And the CEO, tall guy, very lanky, said, diversity training saved my marriage."
Wow,
Yeah, everybody's mouth flew open.
I bet so.
He said,
Wow.
"I learned about gender differences, and
Wow.
I learned to understand my wife. And if it happened to me in my marriage, it has to happen with the other groups of diversity too."
Excellent.
It was
Wow.
amazing. So what you said
Wow.
about the leader modeling the change, yes.
That's excellent that he had the nerve enough to say that in that setting.
The
Saved my
confidence,
marriage. Yes, the
yes.
confidence. Good for him.
Talk about this is the section where you talked about non-dominant groups in other countries.
Mhm.
We in this country seem to treat race as the only area of difference that promotes the discrimination or that requires awareness of diversity. Talk to us
Mhm.
about what's happening in other countries.
Okay, so, you know, we can't just take what's here and apply it anywhere else. But everywhere there are non-dominant groups. And so they might not be, you know, well, they're women everywhere. They are women everywhere. But they might not be Jews everywhere. They might not be Muslims everywhere. But the way to identify the non-dominant group in a setting, okay, they have to be identifiable because if they're not identifiable, if they blend in with everybody else, how then can you single them out for differential treatment? And so, so in the United States, we can tell who is Black pretty much. But if they are very, very light and have straight hair and light eyes, then we might not be able to tell that they're Black, and therefore we couldn't single them out for differential treatment. But in terms of global diversity, they have to be identifiable. And so, like Jews at one point were made to wear armbands. So
Right.
you can't identify them unless they have this armband on. And so in different cultures, you might make them live in a certain environment. You might make them carry certain passports because if you can't identify them, you can't treat them differently. So they're identifiable, they have power differentials. And so you have to be more powerful than they are in order to be able to treat them differently. And then you discriminate against them. And the fourth thing is, and this is research by Anthony Dworkin, and they talked about what is a minority. And that's these people are identifiable, power differences, discrimination, and then group awareness. And that helps them say, they're treating me this way because of the color of my skin, or because I'm gay, or because I have a disability. And group awareness can help them rise up. So in any setting, you would see, okay, so who doesn't have the right to vote? Who makes the lowest wages? Who lives in the shanty towns or the favelas? Those are the people who are the non-dominant groups in this setting. And you can go all around the world and find the non-dominant groups in different settings. Who doesn't have the right to vote, or who just got the right to vote, but who is harassed at the polls.
Okay, so is this tendency to discriminate, to look down on, you hear, and I'm just going to be real candid here, okay?
Mhm,
You
mhm.
hear a lot of Black people say that's the province of white people, and that it's the white people who are doing this and who have a special propensity for hatred. What's your response to that?
Okay, so I feel like we tend to prefer people who are like us naturally. But without the power to discriminate, it doesn't matter who we prefer. And so the research in terms of similarity effect, there's research on similarity effect. And what it shows is that white people tend to, in organizational settings, choose white people more so than equally qualified white people or slightly less qualified white people. They'll pick them over a person of color. But minorities don't tend to do this. And I believe that, and I haven't seen any research that looks at this, but internalized racism, it's a real thing. And so there are Black people who think white people are better than Black people, who think Black people are lazy, who think Latinos are lazy. There are Latinos who think white people are better than Latinos, Black people are lazy, Latinos are lazy. So internalized racism can get into our own bodies and psyches. The other thing that I think that, and research hasn't looked at this, but I believe Black people are less likely to prefer a less qualified Black person over a more qualified white person, or to surround themselves in an organization with Black people because of higher scrutiny. So you can see an organization that has the 5 leaders and they're all white men. If the 5 leaders were all Black men, everybody'd be looking and saying, they must be just hiring Black people. That's all they're doing. And so I think in part that keeps Black people from discriminating against white people when they have the opportunity, and they're also less likely to have that opportunity.
Okay, so let me just play this back. You're saying, first of all, internalized racism makes us more likely to view whites as superior anyway, whether we acknowledge it or not.
Right. Yes, you're subject to this from being in this society. And
Just
so it's all around. It's all around. And if, I tell my students to take the implicit association test,
yes.
and I tell everybody to take different tests. And so Black people, oftentimes when they take the test, they will say, it said I'm racist against Black people. It says I prefer Black people. Well, pay attention to that. And why would that be so? Why would you think that might be so? Because society gives us messages all day in and day out about who's smart and who's not smart, who's lazy and who's not lazy. And the women who take the test will say, I don't think women should be home with children. But you get messages about that day in and day out. I'm working. Yes, but you get messages about this day in and day out. And so that means you need to be aware of your actions, because this is probably in your psyche. And so, yes, in going back to answer your question about internalized racism, that affects a lot of people. I had a student recently who talked to me, was a Latina, about internalized racism and how she was going to talk to her family about that. She'd never heard about that. She'd never seen the research about that. But once she read it, she was like a light bulb turned on in her head. And she was going to talk to her family about that and what that does to the little children in the family.
The basis of my question was that discrimination happens everywhere.
Mhm.
What you're refining that to say, I mean, all groups discriminate, but what you're refining that to say is that Black people having less power, have less opportunities,
Mhm.
and then internalized racism would make it even less likely
Right, right.
for
And
it to.
also the same thing for internalized sexism. So women have less power, less opportunity to discriminate against men, and they also may believe that men are better leaders than women because they've been socialized to believe that. You know, if you hear about people talking about the queen bee syndrome and women talking about women PMSing and all kinds of sexist stuff, we've heard these same messages. And so we're subject to acting upon internalized ableism. It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
There's a tendency now for some whites to say they're more likely to be discriminated against than people of color or women or whatever. White males are saying they are more subject to discrimination. What's the research on that?
Um, it's just not true. It's not even close to being true. Um, some years ago, there was somebody who looked at thousands of cases, discrimination cases, and it was thousands, and I can't remember how many thousands it was, but they found 6 that alleged what people call reverse discrimination, discrimination against a white person or a person of color. Only 6 among thousands, and they counted them up, and they looked at the plaintiffs, and they looked at what they were alleging. There's also, if you look at the research on who's in positions of power, if you look at research on audit studies, my friend Mark Bendick does a lot of audit studies, and that's where they send resumes or people, actual people out to real organizations applying for jobs, and they send white men, Black men, Latinos, they send different groups of people out and they see who gets called back. And it's far and away white men get called back more than everybody else. Sometimes it's 2 and 3 times. There's research on if you have a Black name, and this was Deva Pager who did this research. If you have a Black name that's identifiably Black, like Lakeisha and Jamal, and they sent out resumes to real employers trying to hire people for real jobs. This was not like paper people in a lab. And if you had a Black name, you had to send out X% more resumes than if you didn't have a Black name. And if you had a Black name and a master's degree, you got similar amounts of callbacks as a white person who had a high school degree. And so I understand that people are led to believe that unqualified minorities are getting jobs instead of white men. And I understand that sometimes when you don't get a job, it makes you feel better to feel like somebody got a job who was less deserving. But if you look at data, if you look at around organizations, if this were happening at high rates, CEOs, senior leaders, managers would still be disproportionately white male. It doesn't fit with the eye test, let alone with the data.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful summary. And I want to add to that. I've read, and I can't find it, research that says that supervisors, managers don't want to tell their good buddy or their favorite employee, you didn't get the job because so and so is more qualified. Instead, they said, HR made me do it.
Made me, yeah, sometimes that happens. Yes, I've read anecdotally that that happens, and that's laziness. And one of the things I recommend that leaders institute in organizations is when you hire somebody, send an email out to the group and say, this is their background. This is their background. They have their MBA from so-and-so. They had 8 years experience in so-and-so company, and they're coming here and in this role. And that keeps you from hiring their good buddy who's not qualified. And that makes everybody who thinks this person got this job because they were Black or Latino or female. No, I thought they did, but they got the MBA from NYU and they had 8 years experience in so-and-so, so they must have just gotten it because they were qualified. And it really can just, squelch that. And if you got to send a resume and send out a blurb for somebody who's just your good buddy and dropped out of high school and has been working for the company for 6 months, that's probably going to make you not do that, not send out that blurb.
That's so cool. Okay, so that's the perfect segue to my next question.
Okay.
Quotas are illegal.
Yes.
You've made that real clear in the book, and we know that.
Mhm.
What should companies do who want to have a diverse workforce, but they can't do quotas? What's the prescription to make it happen?
It's so easy. I just
I
don't
know.
know why
It's
people,
almost embarrassing to ask you that question, but go
you know, change your sources of applicants. Yeah, just change where you recruit. If you've been recruiting at a place where the student body, for example, if you're doing college recruiting, is homogenous, you're going to get a homogenous applicant pool, and you're going to get a homogenous hire to add to your homogenous, group. If you want to get people who are diverse, go to a school that has diverse applicants. That's all you got to do. Just go there and go. You want accountants, you want finance majors, you want management majors, go to a school that's diverse. If you don't know any nearby, go to an HBCU, go to an Hispanic serving university, go to a Native American and Pacific Islander serving university, go to Gallaudet University if you're looking for people who are hearing impaired. Change where you go for sources. First thing, easy thing to do. And people, well, we've always recruited at my alma mater is Notre Dame. And when I was there, it was 97% white. It was high 90s Catholic. It was 75% male. Well, I've always recruited at my alma mater. Well, maybe you should recruit there and also recruit at Southern University. That's an HBCU. Maybe you should also recruit at blah, blah, blah. That's, not so homogenous.
Okay, so take us from recruitment to now screening and interviewing and selecting. What should we do?
So screening. There's research on, I mentioned to you earlier, name-based discrimination. You should assign every resume numbers. Assign them numbers. Don't have their name be identifiably Black, identifiably Latino, where they can get ruled out of the pool. And some people say, well, that will help you. Well, the research shows, unfortunately, that it doesn't help you. Like, you think that you go to a company that says they're seeking diverse applicants, and you have that you're, even if you don't have a Black name, that you're a president of the League of Black Business Students or
Yes.
something like that. Those cues, people look at them and will sort you out a lot of times. There's research on that, also cues about if you were president of a gay club, organizations will sort you out. There's research on that. And so if you can have somebody in the recruiting stage that can go through and screen out things that would get them screened out for non-job related criteria, you need to do that. The next thing into recruiting selection, you should really have structured interviews where everybody gets asked the same questions that are based on a job analysis. What do we want this person to do? And then have questions that ask, your background, whatever will make sure you think this person can do it. Ask everybody the same questions. None of this, tell me about yourself. And then you start talking about football, or you start talking about something that's not job related, then that can help you select the best candidate, not just your frat brother or sorority
Well, wait a
sister.
minute now. By the time we're at the interview, now we can identify the person's.
Yes.
Okay, so Your prescription is do the numbers for the screening for qualifications.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But now screening for ability to do the job, that's in person.
Yes, and you ask everybody the same questions,
Okay.
and it helps to have a panel of diverse people on the panel.
Okay.
That helps. And so if your panel is all one group, all white men, for example, they might think that this white woman is just going to get pregnant and quit. But if you have some white men and some white women and some black people and whatever, they might be more apt to just look at this person's answers to the same questions, um, and look at beyond the surface of, I think she's a young woman, so she's probably going to get married and quit. And so it helps to have diversity on the selection committee, the selection pool. That helps a lot too.
How can a manager introduce this person to the team in a way to up the likelihood of them being accepted and welcomed? And I'm saying this because I have so many clients who have not felt that they were accepted because of some difference.
And that's a really hard thing, because what happens in situations like that a lot of times is that people quit. And so you spent your money recruiting them, you might have moved them across country, you might have, all kinds of stuff. And then you have to go try to do this again. And so one thing I recommended earlier is make sure everybody knows how qualified this person is. We brought this person
That's
in
beautiful.
because they have this BS in engineering that we were looking for and these skills that we were looking for. And we had 5 people on the team. You might have somebody on the team be their buddy, the person who helped interview them, brought them in, be their buddy. Make sure they get invited to lunch regularly. Make sure they get their stuff all set up on their computers and their workspace. Make sure that they're ready and not just sitting around where people can say they don't even have any work to do. They just hired them because they wanted to hire a fill in the blank. You can also, if you have a formal mentoring program, assign them a formal mentor, perhaps out of a different group, a different organization, so they can, feel free to tell them what's really going on. You don't want to find out what happened to somebody when they're walking out the door. Then it's too late. I've had people say to me, well, I made them a counter offer and they wouldn't accept it. Once they start looking, it's too late then. It's already too late then. And so you want to make sure they feel included. Inclusion is where they can bring themselves to work too. So if they're a gay person, can they bring their partner's picture to the office and put it on the desk? Just like a straight person would bring their partner's picture to the office and put it on the desk. Can they do that? So there are lots of things that are for the individual that you need to know what it is to try to help them feel included. But if you're concerned, you want to try to find those things out and help them feel included.
Okay, so I have my last question. That's
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm wrestling with constantly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, we want the diversity for the additional brain power and all of that, different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about that. On the other hand, there is something called cultural fit.
Mm-hmm.
Does the person fit in with the way things are working in the organization? How do you recommend managers reconcile that tension?
Okay, that's a tough question, and people often mention fit, but fit is often a code word for racism or sexism. They won't fit in here. Well, why won't they fit in here? What is it? Do you tell racist jokes? Do you tell sexist jokes? Do you tell heterosexist jokes? Why won't they fit in? Okay, so the culture we have is we come to work at 8 and we leave at 7 every day. Well, is this a culture that we should be embracing? Or would it be better to let people work from 7 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever's a normal workday? Does the culture perhaps need changing? is the culture just something that we've always done it this way? And we do need to change it. Something that people are wrestling with now is trying to bring everybody back to the office. And there's research on it helps people with kids, it helps people with disabilities, it helps people with parental responsibilities, it helps people with productivity because they're not sitting in traffic a long time, spending money on gas. But we've always had the office full. Well, maybe we don't need to do it this way anymore. And so, what I encourage people to think about is it just a cloak for racism or sexism to say they won't fit in? They don't golf. They don't golf. They won't know how to do this with us. Maybe we can do some other things. Maybe we can, shoot some pool. Maybe we can do some other things that would broaden what other people might enjoy also. So it's sometimes a cloak for discrimination or racism, sexism, whatever. And sometimes the culture does need some change. And that's something for organizations to sort of think about.
Okay. One of my clients, former clients, a Black male, insisted that he was being pushed to code switch to
Oh,
act white.
mm,
And I said, what describe the behavior? He said, everybody else wears jeans and a hat. But when I come in with my hat and my braids, I'm told I'm not professional. Everybody wears jeans and a hat. And yet I'm told I'm not being professional and I need to talk in a certain way and I need to act a certain way.
so that would be one example where it's a cloak for racism, and needs to go. If everybody can wear jeans, everybody can wear jeans. And people will single out people's locks. But if my locks are the same length as your hair, what's the difference? Or if my locks are the way I want to wear my hair and it's neat, professional, and clean, why are you having a problem with it? Because it's on my Black face and head. And so people really need to be careful about the word professionalism. That always, makes me have hackles. And the code switching the language, that happens a lot with people, African Americans, trying to talk white, for lack of a better word. And it's awkward. And it's very awkward. And I've talked with people who say, well, I couldn't even understand what he was saying. Well, are you serious? Are you serious you couldn't understand it? Or did you just decide that you didn't want anyone speaking this way? Um, there was a case about going back to discrimination against a company that the judge ruled that they could have used someone's vernacular speech as a way of ruling them out in the phone call process, not just their name. But if we think about the diversity in our society, we have all kinds of people. People speak in Boston accents, in Chicago accents. Like, why do we not then like an African American vernacular? Because it's racist. And that's something that we need to work on in the organization. And if we can get the leader to understand some of this stuff and to stop it, then that can go a long way in helping it trickle down.
Okay. That's what I was looking for. Because I do coaching, I literally can sometimes get tangled up in how much should the person accommodate the situation or the situation accommodate the person.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're saying always put racism put the structural impediments there first.
That's what I
Address
would say.
them first.
Address them first, for sure, for sure. And you think about something like language, you know, this is personal to us. I've had people be asked to change their name, go by something else, go by something that doesn't sound so Black because the customers won't take your call. And your name is something your parents gave you. You love this. I've had people who were Indian, same kind of thing. Change your name. Like, that needs to go. that really needs to go.
Yeah. I had a class once. This is early in my teaching career. A student wrote anonymously. She does not use professional language because I would just start talking after I got to know them. So after that, at the beginning of every class, I would say, look, y'all, you see, I called you y'all. I'm a Southern Black woman. The more
Mhm,
comfortable I am with you, the more I'm going to talk like a Southern Black woman. If any of you think I sound unprofessional, come tell me to my face.
mhm,
And that ended that.
mhm.
And
Good.
then when I started getting very vernacular, students would say, "Oh, you're getting comfortable with us." I
That's
said,
excellent.
yes,
That's excellent.
I'm getting comfortable.
Yes, and you're gonna learn a lot from it, right? You're
Yes,
gonna learn
yeah.
a lot more if I'm comfortable with you.
I'm going to
Yeah,
use double negatives. I'm going to say ain't. I'm going to use some slang. All of that
yes,
happens. I'm
yes,
comfortable.
yes, yes. And a lot of times the white students get it. They get it. They get the double negatives. Sometimes there's nothing more appropriate than a double negative to make the point. Like it really makes a point. And you mentioned evaluations when you were young. I've talked with so many people, and in my organization too. Teaching evaluations are really problematic. They're racist, they're sexist, and there's research on this. Why are we still using them? And people won't say things to your face, but they'll write it down. They'll
Is
write it down.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so I've been delighted with this conversation. It's been
so
very informative. What
it
do
was
you
fun.
want people to take away?
Um, I would like for people to take away a couple things. We need to start by recognizing our common humanity. And if we can do that, that'll help resolve a lot of the problems that we have. We're all born, we're all going to die. In the middle, we're going to have some fun, we're going to have some pain, we're going to, you know, become ill, hopefully get better, lose loved ones. Recognize our common humanity, regardless of race, sex, sexual orientation, age, disability, fill in the blank. And I would also say, recognize that we have so much to learn. We have so much to learn about each other and about this world and about society, and be open to learning. Be open to learning. A lot of times people think they know it all about diversity. They think they know it all about race or sex and racism and sexism. There's so much to learn about different groups, and I love it when it happens to me. I love it when it happens to me. And every semester, I tell my students, I wrote the book, but I'm going to learn some stuff from you this semester. And I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to see if there's literature on this, and I'm going to put it down for other people to learn. And so there's a whole lot that we can learn. So I would like for folks to take that with them too.
Be willing to learn. So many people think that if they don't know, it's a ding against them.
Right.
And the
Right.
ding is the unwillingness to learn.
That's the ding. That's the ding. Right. For sure.
So I want to thank you very much. This has been fascinating and informative. And I am still amazed having listened to you talk because you know this. It sounds so silly. You know this stuff. You wrote this mammoth book and you know it. It's you know.
I've read those articles. I've read them. But I tell you, Jean, I tell you, this stuff has made me ill. Diversity work has made me ill. I have a chronic illness and it's related to diversity work.
I
It's called
believe that.
sarcoidosis. I don't know if you know about sarcoid.
What
It's
was
where
it?
the sarcoidosis, SARCOID,
Okay.
it's where the immune system attacks organs. And
Oh,
Bernie
okay.
Mac had it. Reggie White, the football player, had it. There's some actress who has it, a young white woman who has it, but it's most common in African Americans and Scandinavians, go figure. But
Oh,
your immune system on high alert attacks organs. And I believe that diversity research and being embedded in the research. And so I'm concerned about Black people. I'm concerned about gay people. I'm concerned about Latinos. I'm concerned about people with disabilities. It's just, and I'm reading all these articles and reading this stuff, and I believe it has made me ill. And I thank God it hasn't killed me, but I do know the literature. I know a little bit too much about it.
Well, I have an invisible illness also.
Yeah.
I have arthritis. I've had it since for 30 years, and they're
Mhm.
not sure what caused it. They first they thought it was rheumatoid arthritis, but now it's just arthritis undifferentiated because every known cause has been ruled out. But I will still just flare up under stress. So
Mhm.
I it's hard.
It's hard. It's hard, but we can't let it kill us. That's the
Yes.
thing.
And Gene, speaking of killing us, Gene Ramsay will kill me if I do not ask you this question. What do you want listeners to know about our book, Conscious Change? You wrote the foreword for our book that Gene Ramsay and I wrote together as co-authors. What do you want readers to know about our book?
I would like for readers to know that it's for everybody. It's for everybody. And I would say there's something in there for everybody. There's so many different vignettes. You can get a piece of this that somebody else got something else from this. And so, we're talking a minute ago about learning and being open to learn. And I saw in the chapters people's learning and how that brought them to the next step where they could say, this worked for me. And so I would tell listeners, there's something in there for you. There's something in there for you. And I am buying it for folks, trying to figure out how I can incorporate it into what I do because there's something in it. And, I also, you may not know this, also loved reframing change. And in the fifth edition, and I'll make sure you get a copy, I used your non-dominant group chapter chart, and I attributed it to you, and I modified some things. I put some more groups in it, but that's the way I feel about this book. It's newer, but I love the other one too. There's something in it for you, and so now that's going to go to all the people who read the fifth edition with your name on it and Jean's name on it.
Oh, thank you. I am so honored. Thank you so much for that.
It was good.
And
It's
what you
good.
just said really strikes me. I hadn't thought of it, but those chapters in Conscious Change are about people learning. They're thrust into a challenging situation and they have to incorporate a new way of responding. They have
Dig
to learn,
figure out what to do.
figure out what to do
Respond.
according to
Yeah.
the principles.
Yes, yes, and go back and look at them. And I think I told you that I have them. Like, oh yeah, I like that one. Oh yeah, yeah, that one's for me. Yeah, I think people should print them out.
Okay. So thank you so much.
It's
And
a pleasure.
it's been a sheer pleasure.
Same. You take care.
So how can people reach you?
Okay. They can reach me on my personal email, um, myrtle dot p as in Paul dot bell at gmail.com.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jean.
So many takeaways. I'll begin with what she said she wanted you, the listener, to get from this, and that's to keep learning. Diversity is a vast field. There is a lot to learn in terms of how to make diversity work in our organizations and how to appreciate it in our lives. It's important that we recognize, as she said, in the end, we are all just human beings, no matter what our culture or our background or what we look like. We can reap the benefits of diversity only if we're willing to keep learning and not assume we've learned all there is to know or be ashamed for what we don't know. She emphasized how she keeps learning from her students and writes down what she learned from them, even as they are learning from her. The second takeaway was hearing her talk about the steps to obtaining a diverse workforce. You hear so many people say they can't find anybody to fit this category or to broaden the diversity of their work groups. She said, it's really easy if people want to do it. Broaden the pool. Seek people outside of the groups that you normally recruit from. In terms of the applications, number them so that unconscious biases won't be triggered. People won't identify a name like Lakeisha and have that trigger automatic stereotypes. So put numbers on the applications themselves for that first screening. Third, make sure your screening committee is diverse, coming from just different points of view. Use structured questions so that everyone gets the same questions. Last, of course, I appreciated what she said about our forthcoming book, Conscious Change, that it's for everybody, that people can find something in our book that relates to a current situation they are in. I could feel Myrtle's commitment to learning and to contributing her knowledge to help us all appreciate the gifts diversity can bring to us and how it can enrich our lives. I am honored that she wrote the foreword to our book and appreciative that she was willing to give her time to us today. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already pre-ordered Conscious Change, please consider doing so. You can just go to our website, www.leadingconsciously.com, and you can find the information on how to pre-order. And we also have what we call an early look, where you can look ahead and read a chapter. Thanks for listening.